All right, my name is Junior Hidalgo, and I'll be going over culturally and linguistically diverse learners and families. Here we go. Okay. First of all, culturally and linguistically diverse are students with cultural, ethnic, or linguistic backgrounds different from macroculture and language of the U.S. white majority, according to Bryant. Now, we have macroculture, which means the general aspect of a location, like the United States. We have a democracy. Macroculture are a group of people with a common trait, like in a common area, or things that are celebrated only in a certain location. Um, the demographic of culturally and linguistically diverse students can have different variations. Currently, there are 4.4 million ELs in the U.S. schools, and Spanish being the first out of this demographic, meaning the largest of that population. Some examples of culturally and linguistically diverse students are bilinguals, people who speak their first language, L1, and English. English learners, students who might have come from different countries or are still were born here and had trouble learning English. Uh, and these could be students who have parents that come from different countries who English is not their first language as well. Uh, this ties in with limited English proficient students. Limited English proficient students is just the more sophisticated federal form of English learners. Now we have also English as a second language student, as and these are kids that have come that could possibly have come from different countries who are in the process of learning English. Non-English proficient students are students who are learning English but have had issues learning the language. And as I put my image here, learning knows no bounds. So anyone could have this type of could be in this type of situation of learning um, English at different levels. All right, here we go. Culture. So I'll start with culture. And according to Bryant, culture is a way of perceiving the world and a system of values and norms that influence our thinking, language, and behavior, which includes customs and values that connect us all. And this is the main reason I put a tree hand in the bottom, trying to connect the whole world, in a sense. Culture is also something that's constantly changing as we go in life. We could be raised in a certain way, and as we get older, we could have different ideas, different thoughts, and different ways of thinking. And these types of thinking, we could teach that to our children, and so on and so forth. So this is culture is something that we share with others that we feel happy to be with, based on my opinion, because that's something we cherish and hold very true to ourselves. Um, According to Bryant, teachers who are culturally responsive strive to match their instruction to the teaching and cultural learning style of their students. I see this more in the elementary level than in the high school level. I think it's mainly because students tend to be more independent at the high school level. Like we tend to see more celebrations at the elementary level than at the high school level as well, culturally with uh, an overall aspect of students, not just for um, CLD students. Anyway, multicultural education. Um, in a multicultural education, all students should feel welcomed, valued, and supported. In a school where students are not feeling welcomed, valued, and supported, these students could have a possibility of not wanting to go to school. I've seen this several times with some students who have just arrived from different locations, and the new school setting could be very complicated for them, and that's something that we don't want to approach. According to Bryant, multicultural education is a process of comprehensive school reform and basic education for all students. I believe that it's a great way to implement curriculum to include a more diverse student population. I believe that all students matter in a certain class. After all, multicultural education is beneficial for all students. Culturally responsive instruction helps the students feel respected and secure in a classroom and at home. And I believe that it's important to at least know a few words in some languages, like the ones that I provide here in the image. Um, anyway, moving on. Uh, Bilingual education, according to Bryant, I have three quotes, and I believe these three quotes are very important. Um, to my point of view, these two first programs, the two-way dual language program and the transitional program, are key transitional programs. And then the ESL program is a separate entity. To me, the two-way dual language program, I feel like that's on its own level, and the transitional program and the ESL program can mix and match as they go along, depending on the level of the student. To me, ESL programs are at a level, at the bottom level. The transitional program are at the next level, and the two-way dual language program, which we can actually, I feel like we can apply the bilingual education program more, is on a higher level, if that makes sense. But according to Bryant, the goal of two-way dual language program is bilingualism for both English learners and English monolingual students enrolled in the program. The goal of transitional programs is to use the students' L1 to support the acquisition of English. ESL programs use English for instruction but support student learning with the use of English as a second language strategy to support second language acquisition. And as I said before, ELs and LEP, they both focus on developing English proficiencies, and LEP stands for Limited English Proficiency, and ELs is English learners, and ESL is English second language. All right. Personally, I like to bounce around with the transitional program and the ESL program when teaching ESL students, depending on the actual student. Moving on. Disproportional representation of culturally and linguistically diverse students in special education. According to Bryant, CLD students are overrepresented only in high incidence disability categories and not in the low incidence disability categories. The way I look at this is high incidence disability categories relate to academic circumstances in where the teacher sees the student academically, of course. And the low incidence disability category is more of an aspect of the actual student. If the student, for example, could be hard of hearing, or could be on a wheelchair, or have the speech impairment, or that sort of stuff. And this type of low incidence disability category, I would say, is more fit for a 504 plan. And the high incidence disability category would be more into an IEP plan, but feel free to correct me if you have more ideas on that. African American students are students that tend to be more disproportionate representations of cultural linguistically diverse students and special education, according to Bryant. And we have risk indices and risk ratios where we divide the population based on the actual demographic of a certain categorical population, if that makes sense. And we also have the underachievement and inappropriate placement that has shown limitations from students with people around them. I believe that if there's a fine line between trying to get a student in placement and inappropriately placing the student. And for this, I believe that students deserve to have multiple assessments before we actually make an actual statement of referring the student to the SPED program. But anyway, Bryant has also mentioned that disability labels stigmatize students as inferiors and abnormal, which ends up resulting in lowered expectations from their teachers, families, and even themselves. And I underlined and bolded this for a purpose, and which potentially separates them from peers and leads to diminished education and life outcomes. There are students that could feel like they're lower than other students, and that's not something that we should let students feel like. But as we work with SPED students, we tend to get the students in a separate setting, and with the separation, they are separated from their peers, as it says in the quote. They tend to have lower expectations of themselves if they don't feel like they belong with the rest of the class. I say this as personal experience sometimes. Anyway, culturally and linguistically diverse gifted students. This is something that's has been very interesting for me. But according to Bryant, these types of students are gifted and talented students can be found in every racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, and linguistic groups. Now, it's very varied from state to state depending on the demographic of each state, but we need to help all the students. Now, there are students who could be gifted and also be part of SPED, and that's completely okay. So there may be students who specialize in a certain area, like English or math. If they're a SPED student and they could be very strong, and then that could be their gift, and that could be their classification in a gifted program. Anyway, bilingualism overall should not be a barrier to be part of the gifted program. At my school, we have started for a couple years trying to get more bilingual students into the gifted program. It's easier to identify a gifted student if that student is monolingual in English than a bilingual student. Currently, I'm trying to get a student into a bilingual student, an ESL student actually, into the gifted program because of how well the student does in school overall. Like I said before, it has nothing to do with the language. It's just the work habit of the student and how fast the student is able to grasp um, the information. But in order to in order to get the student, I feel to the gifted program, I feel like this we need to help the student be successful, and by that, I feel like I need to make sure that the student feels valuable. That I will always have high expectations and to be continuing with the teacher observations and the assessments and keep an eye on those and having that as a backup for the gifted program. Probably this might not happen this year, but hopefully it'll continue next year when the student goes into the high school. RTI for CLD learners. An RTI framework, according to Bryant, includes instructional procedures that address students' learning needs, requires data on student performance, and includes procedures and criteria for identifying students who need Tier 2 or Tier 3 support. As mentioned before in previous chapters, with Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 1 is the most general aspect of students, Tier 2 is more focused, and Tier 3 is more a one-to-one based of teaching, if in small summary, right? In order to figure out if the student requires RTI, we need to look into assessments. Now, in the book, we have that bilingual students get tested in their L1, and ESL students get tested in English. Now, I believe that we need clear guidelines for this because there might be ESL students or EL students who maybe different levels of English. I know that there is beginning English, there's intermediate English, and advanced English. And trying to identify the students in these sections is something that could be very complicated. And I feel like we shouldn't take all these students into one bubble. And I feel like in order to do this, we need to find better assessments for the students. But another thought is the evidence-based instruction, or the RTI, that goes along with RTI. And we also have the multicultural special education instruction, which I'll follow along in the next slide. Multicultural special education programs. Sorry. We have a few goals about this, and the goals I referred in Bryant's is to reduce inappropriate referrals, improve assessment procedures, enhance instructional and support services. I think these are highly, especially reducing inappropriate referrals. I feel like if the student has been inappropriate referred, I think that the student should always have a little insight of what the general education is doing, so the student doesn't get behind and have issues of not being able to catch up. And some of the identified practices referred in the book are dialogue, collaboration, visual representation, explicit instructions, and inquiry. So overall, having the students work together, I believe, in reading and in math and English, it would help them get better. And that's why I have this image. We have bilingual special education, which is also additional instructional support. We need to check in our language of instruction. We need to be sure that the students in special education receive the same education. Some examples, we have our ELs. ELs who are part of the bilingual special education have reading difficulties. They have English as their second language. And something that I found out this past year is that in order for a student to be referred from an ELL class, the student needs to be in the country for a year because they can't test the student prior to it in their first year because I guess it's understood that the student doesn't really speak English yet. But I'm a strong believer that even if the ELL student has issues with English, they could have a possibility of testing in their first language, and regardless if the student is ELL or not. According to counts, EL who have non-native English speaker parents and guardians are less likely than those with English-speaking parents to be identified for special education eligibility. It's important that these students have support and have instructional practices in reading, and the curricular modifications be done in oral language. All right. Working with culturally diverse families. Parents should be actively participating in the child's special education process through activities at school and supporting at home. The same thing follows with any student. I believe it's important that parents are involved in the school, regardless of their cultural background. It's important to get parents involved and be participative and take action. And I've seen some parents who feel motivated, but I feel like it's still in English-speaking world still, if that makes sense. One way that the teacher could have a better communication approach with culturally diverse families that come from different countries who have a different first language than English is by having an interpreter. Interpreters are very important. Myself included, I'm an interpreter at the school, and I interpret for every occasion, mainly in Spanish, of course, and it requires a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of grasping information. Sometimes they have to summarize, depending on what the teachers say. But I don't put in my own information into the discussion. I do put in clarifications, but once I do clarifications, then I talk to the teachers and clarify them of the clarification. Another communication approach is having parent-teacher conferences and having family considerations. Family considerations are viewing who are the parents that are most attached to the child, per se. And so based on my perspective with Spanish-speaking parents, it tends to be more with the mom. Occasionally, very, very rarely with the dad, but it's mainly the mom who does most of the hustling with Spanish-speaking parents. I don't know if it's because of um, trying to find that ideal focused parent. I don't know why, or I don't know if it's the immigrant base or not, but I think it's family per family basis, and I don't think it's right to generalize it. Um, and considering the ideals of the parent, every move we make at the school needs to be approved by the parent, and all this information I got it by Perret. Alright, I have a few questions for you guys. What are a couple examples of culturally diverse students? Alright. And what is the type of bilingual education? There's two, and the ESL one, remember. Alright. And what's one communication approach to successfully communicate with culturally diverse families? Which I just mentioned like a minute ago. One of them being an interpreter. All right, moving on. A few questions that I have. How can we make sure that CLD students feel part of the classroom? I feel like if we could arrange our curriculum to help the students out, I think that'd be a great reach for the students. What can we do before referring a student to EL student SPED? I believe that we could assess the student in their home language. And then we need to approach into that aspect whether the students needs to have the language, whether it be Chinese, Japanese, or Arabic, or whatever. I think we need to move on to not just focus on the English aspect of the accepting assessments only in English. I think we need to move on more than that and get more into other activities. And I think we should start with Spanish, since Spanish is the main other language in the United States. What can we do to help parents better understand the school system? I think by doing brochures and welcoming the parents more into the school and having secretaries who are more welcoming to the parents that are that has different cultural backgrounds. All right. Moving on. I have 3 resources. This YouTube page where you guys can watch, and about how a culturally diverse classroom could look like in the kindergarten. Teacher vision. I have a teacher vision for parents, for teachers. A lot of information about bilingual education, multicultural education, and bilingual special education. Colorín Colorado, I really like this term. I really like this website. It's great for ELL students. Colorín Colorado, it's a Spanish word. I speak Spanish a lot faster than I do English. It's like a happy ending, and with that, move on to the next slide, and here are my references. And like Colorín Colorado, este cuento se ha acabado. Thank you. All right. How do I stop these?